Camila Valdés León is the director of the Caribbean Study Center, an office attached to Casa de las Americas. She is maybe the youngest person to occupy this position in this important institution. Also, she loves to teach, and she has been in the classroom as a teacher since she was still a college student. She studied philology, and now she is committed with investigation and with spreading the culture and knowledge of the Caribbean. With Camila Valdés, we talk today in From Havana.
Well, Camila, thank you so much for accepting this interview, this conversation about you and your work here in Casa de las Americas.
Thank you for inviting me.
Tell me, you as a child, you had any artistic desires, or you wanted to be something else? How was your childhood?
I had to say that I had a very good childhood, and I have to thank for that my family, of course, because they protect me and nourish me in a way that later on allowed me to start becoming the woman I am. So I should have said that. My family is a family of philosophers. Therefore, thinking about what you do and the words you use and the meaning words have and the meanings of life was also always part of it. If that encouraged an artistic way of facing life, I think you're right, yes. I might have, I did have that in my childhood.
You are not laconic, maybe it's not the word, but you are a person that when I look at you, I think she's analyzing something, she's always thinking or overthinking things, and not in a bad way. Do you want to be a philosopher at some point of your life?
It's funny, the word philosopher, because again, as a child, whenever I was asked, what does your mother and father do? I had a hard time trying to explain what philosophy was and what actually they do, because other parents work doing specific things, and my parents work thinking.
And explaining things.
And explaining. I think I understood better what philosopher was because they were teachers. And what they did and what they do is to teach others how to dialogue through thinking. And perhaps that's what I incorporated in my life.
You went to La Lenin. We know it's one of the best schools in the country. And when you were about 20 years old, we were talking about that you had your first experience as a teacher. Do you wanted to become a teacher at that moment, or you were the typical kid that teaches the dolls and the toys in her bedroom?
Every kid imitates what it sees, and what I saw was my father and mother teaching, and the environment in which they move. So of course, I imitate them as a teacher, and of course I taught my dolls a few things that I hope they remember. I no longer remember what I taught them. Later on, every time I was faced with the chance of teaching, I always embraced that. I think I love to dialogue with other people, to share knowledge, not coming just from me, but to share it, to construct knowledge as part of a dialogue. So I taught I taught a few classes as part of my training when I was a teenager. That's part of school. But then when I started studying at the Faculty of Arts and Letters at the University of Havana, I decided that one of the possible outcomes of what I was studying could be being a teacher, and I immediately embraced that. So when I was around 20, I think I taught my first real class, meaning in front of a classroom with more than 30 people looking at you, trying to understand what you're saying, you trying to understand how they feel and how they are following what you're trying to communicate. And that was my first experience. Of course, perhaps it was not as good as I thought it was, or it was not as disastrous as I thought it was, but it was the first one. And ever since, I had not stopped, and it's part of my life.
Do you have any contact with any of those kids that were in that classroom that day?
Which of the many classrooms?
The first one.
The first one, yes, I do. Because I was not that much older than they were. I was 20, 21, and they were
20,
18. They were 18, so I was only two or 3 years older than them. And that's a good thing of teaching, if you can turn your students, or if they can turn you if you can become friends in the act of sharing knowledge. That's the best outcome of a class that you might have.
I have to say that you teach me. I was a student, you were a student at some point of mine, when I was a student in journalism. I wasn't a really applied one, a really good one, not a focused one. I was always reading in the back of the class, so I can tell. My class was a hard class, a difficult group for you. You have told me. How do you deal with teaching year after year the same subject or the same class? How do you deal to not get bored of what you're doing?
Well, when you first face a class, a program for a class, first of all, you have to follow it as it was described by others, because you have to learn it. You have to incorporate it to you. And then you can allow yourself to make small transformations, because you are critical about what you're teaching. And then when you have already incorporated that you feel free enough to do those transformations, you begin to play with it in a thoughtful way in order to better give a better class to the students, because the student is not an abstract thing. It change as well as one change as a teacher. So you cannot be, and this might be philosophical, you cannot be the same teacher every time you enter in the class, as well as the students will never be the same each time you teach a class. Time passes, so you have to transform the program, and each class as a group of students demands of you different approaches, because you need to see it in their eyes. I think a bad teacher is someone that has just resigned to always keep on doing the same thing because it's more comfortable, had stopped feeling surprised by the student and had stopped wanting to surprise the student. So I might be teaching the same class that I taught 10 years ago, but I know it's not the same class, because I don't face it the same way. I have made transformations, and my students are not the same. They demand different.
Of course. Right, you're really young. I'm not going to say your age here, but you are really, really young.
It's no problem.
And you've been working here in Casa de las Américas, which is an outstanding center, cultural center, sort of speaking. And right now you are the chief of the Caribbean Studies Center.
Yes.
How do you deal with that, with being really young and deal with responsibility like that?
Well, I think the best place I could have come to is here. I have always felt, since I started working here almost 8 years now, I've always felt free as well as committed to the work I do. And that is very important for someone, no matter how old or young you are, that you feel free to do your work and at the same time committed with the place you work in, with the kind of values that places hold. So 8 years ago, when I came here to work at the Caribbean Studies Center as part of a program of studies that connected University of Havana young teachers with the work that the then director of the center, Yolanda Wood, did. When I came here as part of that program, it was also another school for me, that I repeat, I enter into that school, this school that is Casa, in that manner, always feeling that freedom of creating, but at the same time that commitment with the other creators that had been working here. Then 3 years ago, I was asked to assume the head of the Caribbean Studies Center, and back then, it's not that long ago, but many things have happened since then. I thought carefully what becoming, at my age then, the head of the Caribbean Studies Center could imply for my life. and what I had to offer. And it took me a while, few days to decide, but when I did, I faced it in that same way. Well, this is just new responsibility that demands from me the same kind of passion and commitment that that had been part of me before at the same institution. But again, I repeat, it's the kind of work that this institution does that helped me to feel, well, you always feel afraid, of course, but to not feel that afraid that I will say no and I will refuse to take that task. And with time, in those 3 years, I think it has been also of the highest importance that other people have joined me, that we have managed to create a team, a working team at the Caribbean Study Center, because it's not only me, we are 4. And I'm not saying this because I want to be falsely humble. I'm saying it because it's true. If we were not a team as we are, it would be impossible to create the kind of congress and events and cultural proposals that we do, because as a team, we dialogue in the same way we do it in a class. We dialogue and we come into a consensus or disagreements on what is the best to be done now, or what is the best approach to the subject, who we might invite. So these other 3 who work in this team are as invaluable for the work of the Caribbean Study Center as we all are.
Regarding that, what is the work of the Caribbean Study Center? What do you do there?
That's a good question. Caribbean Study Center is part of Casa de las Americas. It was founded in 1979, 40 years now since that foundation. And at that moment, it was conceived that this center could be the node, a center of a system of relationships in a regional projection. So from Casa, from Cuba, the center could work as a connecting point for the Caribbean area, for the Caribbean region that is bigger and more diverse than just the geographical nature of the islands, because it involves many other spaces around the Caribbean Sea and as well as in the diasporas. So when the center was founded in 1979, it conceived its work as a sort of beacon of cultural integration, and in that manner it started to work. From that foundation you have, and that will clarify what kind of work was conceived to be that center could do. You have the task done by George Lamin, a Barbadian writer who was another worker from Casa, from Barbados, another worker from Casa trying to define the work of the Caribbean Study Center. And 2 years after the foundation, a magazine started to appear on an annual basis. The magazine is called Annals of the Caribbean, Annales de la Caraïbe, Annales del Caribe. And I said it in 3 of the many languages spoken in the Caribbean because that magazine was crucial for the kind of work that the Caribbean Study Center intended to do. And it was also crucial because from the beginning, it conceived itself as a multilingual magazine.
Caribbean is...
Exactly. And all the directors who had the head of the Caribbean Study Center and the head of the magazine all along these years have managed to keep on with the work at first issue from 1981, and the latest issue of that magazine was launched last week, the issue from 2018.
You were talking about this a few minutes ago. There's any relationship between the center and the university, or how does education comes to the center? You as a researcher and as a teacher.
You know, to start answering that question, I think I must say that for a cultural institution to work in the way Casa had done it in these 60 years, meaning proposing and transforming according to times and always keep on track of what is necessary at the moment to be discussed. I think that that characteristic of CASA is entangled with the research and the teaching. CASA is a research center as well, and CASA is connected to the university, not only University of Havana, and that had implied that, and now I'm talking specifically of the Caribbean Studies Center, that had implied that all along these 40 years you had many theses, for example, being done on Caribbean topics whose researchers come first or come to CASA, come to the Caribbean Studies Center in order to receive guidance, to receive bibliography, to discuss with the researchers from the Caribbean Studies Center. Many of them have also been tutors of those theses. At the same time, you had that the Caribbean Studies Center had proposed different classes or even those congresses that implied in a way a concept to be taught or concepts to be discussed. For example, in the 80s it was a tremendous in the Creole, Haitian Creole class that was organized from CASA, from the Caribbean Studies Center. And if you keep on looking the history of the directors, all of them have been connected to the teaching. And even when we started this interview, I told you that I entered into this institution because I was part of a studies program between University of Havana and the Caribbean Studies Center. And I keep on teaching because that's what allows me, and it also allows the other members of the team from the Caribbean Studies Center to create from culture a transformation in knowledge as well. They cannot be apart, they have to be entangled, otherwise you are doing no transformation. So it's a reciprocity issue, I think. You teach, you produce culturally projects that must have an impact on students, and at the same time as a teacher, you attested in the students what they are eager to know and what you can propose to them from the culture. It's not, I'm putting it in two sides, but it must not be separated. And I think the history of the Caribbean Studies Center and the present of the Caribbean Studies Center proves that.
You said it, the Caribbean Studies Center is turning 30 this year, and the CASA is turning
40, even more.
40, yes, 40, and CASA is turning 60
yes.
This year. Do you have any sort of activities dedicated to these two anniversaries?
Well,
is there going to be special things that you will be proposing?
I think we do a special things every year. I think we do that, and I think that's the way we have approached this anniversary. It's a moment, of course. You said, wow, 60 years old, what have we done? We have done a lot. CASA, Caribbean Studies Center, all the departments. But that should not pull you back from keep on doing it in the same way as if 60 years hasn't passed by. Why do I say that? Because when you see the history of CASA, you see that substance of the institution, and I think that's part of that core of this institution is part of what the work of the founder, Aire Santa Maria, imprinted in it. Meaning, you must always work. You cannot rely on what you have done and is already done, because culture is not a product. It's not something that you produce and it's there, done. It's not fixed. Culture is a process. Culture is a dialogue. So if you face it like that, you are all the time aware that your need to be changing according to the time and according to the memory of what you have created. So when you see the history of CASA in the 60 years, you see that same, that nature going all through it. So we are facing this 60th anniversary with the same work we have done and with new work, as always, as we do it every year. So during this year, of course, we have taken that time to think about that past, but also to think about the present from which we are building the future. So it's a new year that just starts. But we have done things, of course. You have the literary prize that happens every year, but in this case, that literary prize also reflected on the anniversary of CASA, the cultural diversity in the Caribbean Congress that we organized from the Caribbean Studies Center also had that as panels to reflect upon. And we have a congress coming on June from the Afro-American Studies program. We had, I mean, all of these things. We have the Women's Studies program that has its congress in February. I could go on and on because all the departments from CASA all the time are proposing work, are
Right now we have
proposing
the
ideas.
poetry, this really big poetry festival here, which is a trench to show what is going on in not only in the world but in the Caribbean from the art, which is important. To close, if somebody asks you, after 60 years, why is it still important, Casa de las Américas, what would you answer to him?
Wow, it's a big question. It's a big question. I think it is important because if someone like me, who was born when CASA was already 30 years, if someone like me conceived this institution as an alive organism, as something that has not died, that keeps on producing life, reproducing life by the forms of the art creation. If someone like me feels that, then you can test that this institution still is the place that was when it was founded in 1959, a place from which you can find the liberty as well as the commitment with your time to create. And I should add that there is is a project in Casa recent that involves all the young people that work here, who are many, and involves them in a way that what we are not doing anything different that Casa does. We are, as part of the institution, we are trying to keep on with the same work being done, meaning construct over and over again those links between the young creators and intellectuals from the Caribbean. That project is called Casa Tomada, Taken House, that comes from the title of a short story of the Argentinian writer Cortázar. And this project involves the young people from here, involves everyone, because it also involves all the work from Casa trying to focus, to intensify the work with the youngers, because the youngers will later on be known as the elders, because that's how it was in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s. And I'm very glad to be part of that project because it also reflects the efforts of the institution to keep on with the rhythm of time. As part of that project, then, we also have congresses that we try to celebrate every 3 years. We started on 2009, on the 50th anniversary of Casa, and to keep on with that connection. So I wanted to add that because that also gives you the idea of why this institution is still alive.
Well, thank you so much for this chance to talk. It was delightful to meet you again as not teacher, student, and to talk with you about Casa and the Caribbean Studies Center. Thank you so much.
Thank you.